Hi everyone, my name is Justin. I'm a mentor here at LEADucation, and today is day 3 of the Intro to Tableau Public course. Today's going to be a bit longer. We'll go over all of these types of graphs, what they're useful for, and show at least one example. And then I'll go over a demonstration of how to do each of them in Tableau. So our first graph is a line graph, which is best for plotting values over time. So as you can see, it's obviously made up of lines, and it can just be one line, or you can compare multiple things with a legend. So it's good for trends, comparisons, timelines, temperature, population, profits, etc. Something that might change a lot that you want to see the drastic changes visually over time. An area chart is similar to a line graph, except it measures the same thing, but it stacks them on top of each other. So you can see, purple is coal and then hydronuclear gas oil for a total of 2,380, whatever that is. And then, but oil only makes up this part, and gas only makes up this part, and nuclear this, and so on and so on. So it's kind of like a line chart in that overall, it's got one big line and then sublines in the middle, but those sublines all account for just a piece of the whole. And it's a great way to represent that visually. So it's good for showing subdivided parts of a total, comparisons, trends, profits of different products, something like that, where you would want to add up the total, but also see the individual components. A bar graph is good for a value versus categories, and like a specific predefined number of categories. So like nicest fruit, there's lots and lots of fruits out there, but you're only choosing 6 fruits to show. And you're not saying like on a scale of red to purple, like all the colors of the rainbow and the fruits that correspond. No, it's just 6 fruits. Or you're just doing 4 cardinal directions. You're not doing every single direction from north all the way back to north. And then on the left here, it's just 1 bar per thing, but then on the right you have each year, kind of similar to that area graph we just saw. And then you can also have bar graphs where there's multiple bars per category that's representing something like different years or a different variable that you're testing. So these are good for a limited number of things you're comparing, non-numerical categories, survey responses, etc. A histogram is similar to a bar graph, but it's different, and this is one that people confuse a lot. So with a bar graph, we see there's categories, non-numerical categories, but in a histogram, it is numerical, but there's still bars. So what they do is they take any data points that fall between 31 and 32 on the hardness scale, they just group it into 1 bar so that it's easier to see. So instead of having a bunch of points scattered all throughout here, it's just 1 bar, and it makes it much, much easier to see trends or patterns or anything like that. So, and there's a lot less information on the graph to process, so it can be very useful for that. It's good for statistical analysis, distribution, a sliding scale of values, again, not categories, but actually numbers, patterns, and some examples, age, time, etc. A scatter plot is good for sliding scales, as is the histogram, but this one is actually all of the dots. It's not grouped into bars. So on the left, here's like your traditional scatter plot. It's just, this point falls on 2.74 diameter or whatever. It's not just like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's anywhere in between, and then anywhere in between on the y-axis. And then over here, this is a rather famous scatter plot. And while it may not look like a scatter plot, it's measured so closely together over 50 years, and it's compressed all into that. So you can see this is kind of closer what it might look like. And then they connect the lines to show and then the red line is showing the actual trend, which is growing upwards, which in this case is very bad. So scatter plots are good for a sliding scale of values showing correlation, looking at trends, temperature, age, time, etc. A pie chart shows values out of a total. So in this case, in all percentages cases, it's out of 100%, but since it's racial demographics, it's probably out of the total sample size of however many people they are surveying or looking at. So 45.4% of whatever sample size they're looking at is Hispanic, and that's a way to represent it. So you can see it's almost half the circle, almost half the people are Hispanic. So it's good for parts of a whole, percentages, population, demographics, budgets is also really great because, again, you get that quick visual representation where people can approximate a quarter or a third or half or something like that. Box and whisker plots are a little more complicated. You probably learned about them in math class. It's also a value versus category. So the middle box here, that's why it's called a box and whisker plot. This is where half of the data is. So from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile, all of that is contained within that box. And then there'll always be a line in the middle, and that's the median value. So not the mean, not the average, but the median. And as you can see, it's called the interquartile range. And then over here, these are called the whiskers, and that kind of shows outliers. So these are good for statistical analysis, understanding outliers, because you can see, if there's two data points over here, but most of the data is in here, you can assume that something went wrong with these or that these are outliers. And so comparisons and test scores are the classic example that I saw in my math class. Geographical maps measure a value over some area, and that could be small as a city or counties or states or a continent or the whole world. And you can see in this one, it's a heat map, which we'll get into next, but it's categorized down here with the key by the color of the country indicates the percent military expenditure as a share of its GDP. And so these are good for comparisons on some sort of scale, but some sort of geographical scale where you visually represent it with the map that everyone is familiar with instead of just listing it out in a table. It's good for things like economy, statistics, weather, something that a lot of countries or a lot of states or cities or whatever you're measuring can relate to and would have the data to provide. Because you can see there's only a couple of countries here that are gray where they either didn't have the data or didn't provide it or something. But you want something where you're going to have a lot of countries that you can fill in and that you can color in. Heat maps, which I talked about on the last slide, measure a value versus a value. So in this case over here, it's traffic, so the time on the bottom, and then the day on the top. So this one is like category versus time. Heat maps are really like super flexible. And then the color corresponds to the key down here. So low traffic here in the early morning and the late night, and then heavy traffic midday. And that's represented easily by colors. There's no numbers involved. Except on the bottom, but there's no numbers involved here. You don't have to determine how many cars per minute passing through this one intersection and track that over 7 days, 24 hours a day. These can be used for more like estimates. And then on the right here, the classic, the snap map. And this heat map is a geographical map, and it measures, the amount of snaps in one area. So it's amount of snaps versus the geographical location. And then red means the most, and then orange, and then yellow, and then either green or blue comes next. I don't remember which one. So these are good for a visual representation with color, limited X values or a sliding scale, categories, dates, weather, etc. And then this is one that is pretty obscure. It's called a Gantt chart, and it's really only good for one thing, which is for schedules, or like planning or projects or something. So you would have a table with dates, how long it would take, and maybe like what task you were doing if you were color coordinating that. But I doubt you're going to use this very much in your life unless you happen to work at a company that uses us. And then finally, we have tree maps, which are kind of like these boxes or rectangles made of lots of mini rectangles, and so these are good for values versus categories. So on the left here, the categories are first car brands, and then inside those car brands, it's the models of the car and how many sales they have. So you can see in all of these, the upper left box is always the biggest, or the one with the most value. And then the smallest one is in the bottom right, and that's the one that has the least value. And so, these can be used for sales, or over here on the right, election results. So you can see Miami-Dade County is the biggest county. It's sorted by size, and then it's color-coded by the political leaning in the 2016 election. So big counties, and then a little smaller counties, and then all the way down here you have the really, really small counties. And so these are great for a visual representation with either size and or color, depending on if you want to use color. Subdivisions, so like in the car sales one, and lots of categories with small values. So like down here, there are a bunch of counties down here. There's probably as many counties here as there are in the rest of the graph, but they're so small that you really just need to see the color of them and the size of them to know their impact on the overall, in this case, in the election. So to start off, we're going to make a line graph here with the date in month, and then the driving time, and you see it's automatically going to create a line chart just because it's going to do that. But then if we go over here to the Show Me tab, we see it automatically settled on discrete, which is this thing where it's broken up into segments. And if I further divide it, then it's going to be broken up into months. And these are separate line charts. But if I click on this here, continuous, well, that's a little crazy. But here, if we go back to this, and then go to month, and then go over here, then that's a little more reasonable, and it's all one continuous segment and one continuous line. That's much easier to understand. And behind my little video box here is December and January. And it even includes the year in it. So that's a way to make a line graph. And now to make an area chart, we're going to do a similar thing, except click on area, and then we're going to add time of day to that. And as you saw, I just dragged it into the view. And then what that does is, you see on the bottom here, these are the night hours that I drove in the months. And then on top, this is the day hours. And you can see kind of like the dots connecting the imaginary line. So like these dots represent July, and then June, May. And then I didn't drive very much in October or November. It was just like a couple days. And they all happened to be at night because I had school. So it's all night right here. And then it goes back to day, and then I didn't drive at night in January. But you can imagine that if I had driven during the day, there would be two completely continuous lines that stacked on top of each other for a total of, it looks around 675 hours in the month of June. And yeah, you can see that there. So that's how you make an area graph. Next, we're going to do a bar graph. Drag that over there. So you've already seen this, but it doesn't hurt to repeat. So right now it's still in the area graph. I'm going to click on the bar graph, and I want to switch those. Well, that did not work. There we go. And then you can see it's highlighted. If I click on another one, it's still highlighted in orange. And that's what it is the most recommending. So all of these ones that are lit up that I can click on are recommended, but the orange one is the most recommended. And this is another type of the bar graph that we saw on the slides earlier, where it's just one bar that's broken up into two segments by color. And then over here is that side-by-side bars, but that doesn't really apply in this case. All right, and so the next one is a histogram. So for this one, I'm going to take driving time. I'm going to drop it in there. I'm going to go to show me, and I'm going to click on histogram. And you can see I only needed one thing for that. It was numbers. And so for this graph, this is what I want. I want the amount of time I drove versus how many times I drove that amount of time. So first of all, I'm going to go over here, right click on this and exclude it because I know it's an outlier and I don't want it messing up the statistical analysis that I'm going to do. So then I'll go back over here. And these bars, this is what I want. This is a goal of the histogram, but I don't want them to be so wide because you can see here, this one starts at 0 and there's 49 times I drove between 0 and 94. But that's way too much. That's not going to give me useful information of blocks of 94 because that's not very helpful. So I'm going to go over here. When you create a histogram, it creates a new category called a bin, which is how it categorizes things into bars. So I'm going to click on this arrow or right click. I'm going to go down to edit and then it pops up. See, it's at 94.7, but I don't want that. I'm not really sure why it thought 94.7 would be a good way to measure it, but I'm going to change it into 30-minute segments. Press OK, and I have to do this again, exclude, and there we go. So we can see here now there's more of a trend that's like that, whereas before it was just a sloping graph, and now you can see it in more detail. And I can even go back, edit this, and say 15, I'll even say 10-minute segments. And now I can see in real detail, because sometimes I drove 10 minutes, sometimes it was 15, sometimes it was 20, 25. So instead of having to look at all those individually, I can see them more grouped together in more detail. And you can see down here, there's some parts where I just didn't drive 150 or 160 hours. And so in this case, for me, with this data that I have, I think 30 minutes is going to work better because then everything is grouped more. But I can see from 30 minutes to 60 minutes, I drove 26 times for the amount of time within this bar, and 16 times for 0 to 30 minutes, and so on and so on. So this is like a great way to see an overall pattern. Next, we're going to do a scatter plot. So let me clear all of this. So I'm going to go here to this second set of data, which is regarding hurricane statistics that I put together a long time ago in 2018. So it's not super up to date, but it was accurate for when I made the spreadsheet. And the reason I'm doing this is because the other data didn't have the right type of data to do a scatter plot. So I'll also include this data file for you so you can practice with this as well. So for my scatter plot, I'm going to drag in the year and then the strength. And I have to change this to the average. So I'm going to go here, click on this arrow, go down to where it says measure, and it's currently set to sum. And I'm going to go down here to average. And it's still not letting me do it. Oh, I know what I have to do. I have to go over here to this marks thing and click on circle. And this is going to show me that scatter plot that I want. Show me thinks it's not useful, but I think this is a good way to see it because you can see how it kind of like varied per year, but it was still the average. You can tell this is like a low. These are low strength years, medium, high, and then 1992. I'm not sure what happened in 1992, but I guess there was a really big hurricane or several really big hurricanes. So now I'm going to go back to the driving time, and I'm going to show you a pie chart. So I'm going to do the same thing, adult initials, driving time, except instead of this bar graph that it is automatically recommending, I'm going to go over here to pie chart. And there's no labels and stuff, and we'll get into that later. But in terms of just the graph, you can see here, driving with my mom more than 75% of the time, which is just an estimate, and then with my dad, the rest. So if this had labels and everything, it would be better, but that's how you make a pie chart. And then I'm going to go back here. Sorry to have you guys switch between so many things. And now we're going to do a box and whisker plot. So I'm going to get the death toll out here, up there, I mean, and then take the name, put it, disappeared on me, here, and then click on box and whisker plot. And so let me change this to average. That didn't do anything. I'll keep it at the sum then. And so you can see here with the name, if I hover over a point, it'll show me the name and the death toll associated with it. Since Hurricane Katrina is such an outlier, it killed way more people than the other hurricanes, it's going to distort this a little bit. So you can see at the moment, you know, the bottom 50% of data is all below this like 9, 6, somewhere threshold. So to see it more clearly, I'm going to right click on this, click exclude, and I'll also click exclude on that one. And then now I can see closer, yeah, 12, 9, all of these data points. This is the bottom 50%, because remember, that's how box and whisker plots work. This is 25% here, this light gray area, and then this is showing the last 25%. And so that's how you do a scatter plot using show me over there. And then we'll do a geographical map next. And so the quick little hack to clearing the view is to click this button up there, and it just gets rid of it all, which is great because if you have a lot of stuff out there, you don't have to drag it all back. So I'm going to do the state of the landfall, and you see it automatically categorizes it as a geographic data field, and so it's going to automatically assume, I mean, there's really only 3 options for geographic, but I don't want this symbol map with circles. I want this one where the states are actually highlighted. And so right now it's just showing all the states that were in the spreadsheet, but when I add, say, the death toll there, then it's going to automatically sort it by color, and I can see Florida overall, the sum of all of the hurricanes in the spreadsheet had 2,900 deaths, and then it looks like the next was South Carolina or Louisiana, and it's just a great way to see it visually represented by color, definitely affecting a lot more of the Southwest, which makes sense because that is where the majority of hurricanes occur. So Next, we're going to do a heat map in here, back with the driving data. So I'm going to take the date, go down here to day. That's another quick way to do it if you just want one thing. And then go over here and get the time. There we go. And then heat map. And then this is sort of a preview for the next day, but I want to drag this on top of the color thing. And that you see that changes it from size to color. And then I want to get rid of this one again because it's such an outlier that that's the darkest square. And then all the other ones are very light by comparison. But you see when I get rid of that, then the darkest squares become like that. So I can see in the early month, I drove a lot, and then at the end, or if I want to see in like the normal traditional view, then I can just go like this, month, day, and then I can see it was 29th of June, the 1st of December, and then the 28th of December that really influenced that. So that's how you can do a heat table map. And then this other one here is sort of a heat map already by default in the form of a geographic map. The Gantt chart is, there's none of this data really has a way to create a Gantt chart that makes sense. So I will not be showing you that. But as I said earlier, it's quite obscure, and I have never used it, and I've never seen anyone use it. But if you do need to use it, if you need help, reach out to me, and I'll try and get your questions answered. But yeah. And then the very last one that we're going to do is a tree map, which is my favorite kind. I think it looks pretty cool. So I'm going to go here and get the month. I'll drag that out of there. And I'm also going to drag the year, and then the driving time. And then I'm going to go over here and click on the tree map. So this is what it looks like. Again, this is making all the other months lighter by comparison. So I'm going to exclude that one. And then I see sort of a visual representation with June, the biggest one, and the darkest one in the upper left. And then November, the smallest one, and the lightest one in the lower right. So I can see here they're labeled automatically. And that's the great thing about Show Me, is that if you don't know how to work all this stuff yet, it just does it for you. And most of the time it's right, which is pretty great. And so that concludes me showing you how to make different graphs in Tableau. And yeah, have fun with these. I think they're pretty cool. So for next time, I want you to try and recreate the graphs as I make them as best as you can, to practice switching between them and to practice going through the motions of what is needed to make each type of graph. And then I also encourage you to try and use the same data fields to make other types of graphs that I showed you. The stuff I did was just what I thought would be best, but you all have different creative ideas than I do. And so see what you can do. The tree map is definitely just that last one that's on my mind. I think it's cool, as I said. It's very versatile. You can use it for lots of things. And then also play around with that hurricane Excel file, because there's a lot of stuff I didn't go through there. And it's definitely something cool that is not only relating to myself. So yeah, have fun, make those graphs, and I'll see you next time. Bye.